The contest. The late afternoon sun cast a golden light across the sprawling estate of Alexander Bradford, a man whose name carried weight in every corner of Atlanta's business world. The Bradford mansion, with its towering white columns and immaculate gardens, had been the backdrop for both celebration and tragedy. It was here, just over a year ago, that Alexander's wife, Charlotte, had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, without a mother. Since then, the mansion had felt quieter, lonelier, despite the constant flow of staff and visitors. Alexander had thrown himself into his work, convincing himself that keeping his companies running at full speed was a way of holding the family together. But the one person who didn't seem convinced was Lily. She had gone from being a vibrant little girl who painted rainbows on every scrap of paper to someone who often sat alone in the garden, talking to no one but the birds. It was his therapist who suggested the idea, a controversial one at that. "You've built an empire, Alexander, but your daughter needs a mother figure again, someone she can choose for herself. Bring candidates into the home for a month. Let her live among them. Let her see who makes her feel safe." Alexander was skeptical at first, but the thought of giving Lily agency, of letting her decide, seemed kinder than forcing a stepmother on her. After much consideration, he selected 5 women from Atlanta's upper crust, women who, on paper, had everything a family like his should want. A high-profile attorney known for winning impossible cases, a celebrated architect whose designs had graced the covers of magazines, a respected doctor from a well-known medical family, a luxury hotel owner with impeccable business sense, and a socialite who moved through charity galas like royalty, all of them beautiful, wealthy, educated, and fully aware that Alexander Bradford was one of the most eligible widowers in the country. On the day the women arrived, the mansion was alive with chatter and the faint scent of imported peonies. Staff hurried about, making sure every guest suite was in perfect condition. In the kitchen, however, away from the polished marble and staged smiles, a different scene was unfolding. Naomi Carter, the new housekeeper, was quietly arranging fresh fruit for Lily's afternoon snack. Naomi had been working at the mansion for just 3 months, but she already knew more about Lily's routines, fears, and small joys than anyone else. At 29, Naomi had lived a life far removed from the silken halls of the Bradford estate. Raised in a working-class neighborhood, she had put herself through college while caring for her younger siblings after their father passed. She had a degree in childhood education and years of experience working with children from struggling families. But after her mother's health began to decline, she'd taken on domestic work to cover the mounting medical bills. She hadn't expected to form such a bond with Lily, but from the first day, the child had clung to her. They played board games in the evenings, baked cookies on weekends, and read bedtime stories that went on long past bedtime. Naomi didn't see herself as a replacement for Charlotte. No one could be. But she understood loss, and she understood what it meant to need someone who would simply listen without judgment. When the 5 women arrived, they made polite introductions to the staff, shaking hands with just enough interest to seem gracious. All except Victoria Harrington, the socialite, who barely glanced at Naomi as she passed. Naomi had been around long enough to know the look, polite disregard, the kind that said, "You're not important enough to remember." The first few days passed with forced civility. The women spent time with Lily, taking her on short walks in the garden or showing her gifts they had brought, French dolls, silk dresses, imported chocolates. But Lily's polite smiles faded the moment she spotted Naomi in the hallway. She would excuse herself from whatever activity the candidate had planned and rush to help Naomi fold laundry or prepare lemonade. By the end of the first week, subtle tensions began to rise. During one afternoon tea, Naomi was clearing the table when she overheard Priscilla, the attorney, mutter to the others, "It's rather odd, don't you think? The child spends more time with the help than with us. What kind of example is that?" The others murmured in agreement, except for Rebecca, the architect, who leaned back in her chair and said, "Children follow comfort, not titles. Perhaps she's found something real there." Her comment earned her a frosty look from Victoria. Unaware, or perhaps entirely aware of the growing discontent, Lily remained as attached to Naomi as ever. One rainy afternoon, the 5 women were gathered in the music room trying to persuade Lily to join them for a piano lesson. Instead, she slipped out and found Naomi in the kitchen rolling dough. "Can I make the butterfly cookies again?" she asked, her face lighting up. Naomi smiled and handed her a small rolling pin. "Only if you promise to help with the dishes after." It was in moments like these, simple and unpolished, that Naomi's influence shone brightest. There were no cameras, no staged affection, just the easy rhythm of trust between a child and someone who genuinely cared. But to the women competing for Alexander's approval, it was a threat. Not because Naomi was vying for the role they wanted, but because without even trying, she had already taken the place they were each desperate to claim in Lily's heart. By the second week, Alexander began noticing subtle changes. At dinner, Lily spoke less about the outings she had with the candidates and more about baking with Naomi or helping her plant herbs in the garden. He didn't discourage it. How could he, when he could see the light returning to his daughter's eyes? But he also knew that the women he had brought into his home wouldn't see it that way. He was right. That Friday evening, while Alexander was in his study, the 5 women gathered in the drawing room. Voices were low, but Naomi, passing by with a tray, caught snippets. "We need to address this," Victoria was saying. "Can't have a cleaning lady becoming the emotional center of this household. Undermines the whole point of this arrangement," added Amanda, the hotel owner. Naomi kept walking, her face calm, but inside she felt the familiar burn of being discussed as though she were a problem to be removed rather than a person. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Alexander reviewed footage from the discreet security cameras he'd installed months earlier for safety. What he saw was not the wholesome bonding he had hoped for, but moments that made his jaw tighten. Condescending remarks to Naomi, exaggerated sighs when Lily ran to her, thinly veiled insults wrapped in polite tones. He wasn't ready to confront them yet, but a seed of suspicion had taken root. He had invited these women into his home to nurture his daughter, and instead they seemed more focused on eliminating the one person who truly had her trust. Alexander didn't know it yet, but this contest he had set in motion was about to turn into something entirely different. A quiet war fought in glances, whispered conversations, and acts so subtle they might have gone unnoticed if not for the watchful eyes of both a father and a child who understood far more than they let on. Whispers and shadows. By the second week, the Bradford estate felt less like a family home and more like a stage where every interaction was a performance. The 5 candidates moved with calculated grace, their conversations laced with the polished charm that came from years of navigating high society. Yet beneath the expensive perfumes and courteous smiles, Naomi sensed something sharper, something waiting for the right moment to cut. She had grown up hearing these tones before, in private school cafeterias where she'd been one of only a handful of black students, in job interviews where her qualifications had been scrutinized more than anyone else's, in the veiled politeness of people who believed kindness was wasted on the help. It began with small things. Naomi would prepare Lily's lunch for school only to find it accidentally replaced with a different meal prepared by one of the candidates. During art time, Naomi's set of paints would mysteriously vanish, replaced with an expensive, unused set gifted by another. Even Lily noticed. "Why do they always change my food and toys?" she asked one morning, her voice tinged with confusion. Naomi brushed a hand over the girl's hair and replied softly, "Sometimes people think they know what's best without asking. That doesn't always mean they're right." It was the kind of answer that told the truth without feeding the tension, but Naomi could see the wheels turning in Lily's young mind. In the evenings, when the house grew quiet, Alexander would retreat to his study with a glass of whiskey and days reports from his staff. Lately, he'd also been reviewing footage from the security cameras, not because he didn't trust the women, but because his instincts told him something was off. The recording showed moments the contestants clearly believed were private. Victoria narrowing her eyes at Naomi during a game of hide-and-seek, Amanda dismissing her with a wave when she entered the room, Christina making a comment about keeping standards when Naomi handed Lily a plate. They weren't loud or obvious attacks. They were the kind of cuts designed to leave no mark except the growing discomfort of the target. One rainy Tuesday, the tension sharpened. Alexander had invited all 6 women, Naomi included, to join him for afternoon tea in the conservatory. It was meant as a casual gathering, a way to let everyone interact in a more relaxed environment. The glass walls framed a view of the storm rolling over the gardens, and the table was set with delicate china and trays of pastries. Naomi poured tea for Lily, who sat between her and Alexander, while the other 5 women occupied the far side of the table. At first the conversation was light, updates on charity events, stories of trips to Europe, discussions of the newest art exhibit downtown. But then Victoria, always the strategist, leaned forward with a tone of mock curiosity. "Naomi, you seem to spend quite a lot of time with Lily. Do you ever worry that you might be overstepping? After all, we're here to form bonds with her." Her smile was thin, the kind that masked an insult as a question. Naomi didn't flinch. "My only concern is making sure Lily feels safe and cared for, regardless of who she chooses as her stepmother," she replied evenly, meeting Victoria's gaze without challenge but without submission either. "That's what Mr. Bradford asked me to do, and that's what I'll continue doing." The simplicity of this The answer made it difficult to attack without looking petty, and Alexander noticed the faint tightening of Victoria's jaw. Still, the women were far from done. Over the next few days, their tactics became more deliberate. If Naomi planned an activity with Lily, baking cookies, building a blanket fort, tending to the herb garden, one of the women would suddenly appear with a better idea, usually involving expensive gifts or elaborate outings. They would then frame Naomi's activities as quaint but less enriching, always in tones that could be defended as concern for Lily's development. But Lily wasn't fooled. One evening, she slipped into her father's study, clutching the worn picture book Naomi had been reading to her. "Daddy," she said, climbing into his lap, "why do those ladies always try to stop me from playing with Naomi? It's like they don't want me to be happy unless I'm with them." Alexander hugged her, torn between the urge to protect her and the knowledge that she was seeing the situation exactly as it was. "Sometimes," he told her carefully, "people forget that love isn't something you can buy. They think they have to prove they're better than someone else, but real love doesn't compete. It just is." Lily thought about this for a moment, then nodded as if filing the truth away for later. Naomi, meanwhile, was quietly gathering her own observations. She didn't have hidden cameras or private investigators. She had experience, intuition, and the patience to let people show who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. Every cruel glance, every whispered comment, every attempt to push her out of the picture, she stored them in memory, not for revenge, but because she knew that eventually, truth had a way of surfacing, and when it did, it would be undeniable. One night, after Lily was asleep, Naomi sat in her small room in the mansion's west wing, writing in a notebook she'd kept for years. It was filled with stories of the children she'd worked with, stories of moments that had changed her, lessons learned from struggles that would have broken someone less stubborn. That night's entry was different. She didn't just write about Lily's laughter or the way her eyes lit up when they baked together. She wrote about the shadows in the corners of this house, about how people could smile while sharpening knives, about how sometimes the most dangerous battles were fought without a single raised voice. What Naomi didn't know was that she wasn't the only one watching. In the coming weeks, her quiet resilience would begin to alter the very outcome the 5 women believed they were controlling. And when the moment of choice came, the one heart they were all fighting for would already have made its decision, not with logic or wealth or appearances, but with the pure, unshakable clarity of a child who knew exactly who loved her without condition. Cracks in the facade. The 3rd week began with the kind of crisp, cloudless morning that made the Bradford estate seem like something out of a magazine. The sunlight spilled over the white columns, catching on the polished brass door handles and the delicate lace curtains that swayed in the early breeze. Inside, however, the atmosphere was shifting. The polite small talk between the 5 women had grown thinner, their smiles tighter. Competition had begun to erode the civility they had maintained in the first 2 weeks. Even the staff could feel it. Those subtle pauses when Naomi entered a room, the sudden change in tone when Lily's laughter drifted in from the garden, the way conversations seemed to freeze until she passed. Alexander noticed it too. At first he had dismissed it as the natural tension of a contest where only one woman would win, but something about it felt different. It wasn't just rivalry, it was the need to diminish someone who wasn't even officially part of the competition. He began to watch with a kind of detached curiosity, wondering how these women, all of whom had built public reputations for grace and generosity, could reveal such sharp edges behind closed doors. That Monday morning, Lily had woken early, excited about a project she had planned with Naomi. For days they had been collecting small stones from the garden to paint into colorful animals for the flower beds. Naomi had laid out brushes, bright paints, and a bucket of warm water in the garden pavilion. Lily, dressed in an old t-shirt and shorts, was ready before breakfast. But as they stepped outside, they found Victoria already in the pavilion, arranging an expensive-looking chess set on the table. "Lily, darling," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "come and learn something sophisticated this morning. Painting rocks is sweet, but chess will sharpen your mind." Before Lily could answer, Priscilla appeared carrying a tray with imported pastries and tea. "And we can make it a proper morning lesson," she added, glancing at Naomi as though she were interrupting something far more important. Naomi said nothing, only stepping aside to let Lily choose. The little girl hesitated, torn between the joy of their planned project and the pressure radiating from the two women. After a moment, she looked at Naomi and asked softly, "Can we still paint later?" Naomi smiled and nodded. "Of course, sweet pea, this is your morning. Do what makes you happiest." Lily's choice was polite but firm. She stayed for the chess game long enough to learn the basic moves, then excused herself to finish painting wit. Naomi. Victoria's expression as the child walked away was a blend of irritation and calculation. That afternoon, Naomi noticed the consequences. When she went to retrieve the paints from the pavilion, the brushes were gone, the paints tipped over and ruined. She found the brushes later in the laundry room sink, their bristles stiff with dried pigment. She didn't mention it to Lily. Instead, she quietly replaced the supplies out of her own pocket, unwilling to let small cruelties steal their joy. But the axe didn't stop there. On Wednesday, Naomi prepared Lily's favorite lunch, peanut butter sandwiches cut into stars, only to have Amanda intercept them on the way to the dining room. "Oh, Naomi, the child should be eating something more refined," she said, replacing the plate with a miniature platter of smoked salmon canapes. Lily barely touched them. The following day, Christina scheduled an impromptu wellness check for Lily, pulling her away from an afternoon in the garden to examine her posture and skin as if she were a patient. "It's just to make sure she's in top form," she explained with a too bright smile, though it was clear she was trying to frame herself as the most caring candidate. The one person who wasn't fooled by these tactics was Lily. That Friday evening, after Naomi had tucked her in, the little girl whispered, "Naomi, why are they trying to make me like them more than you? Don't they know I've already picked?" Naomi's heart twisted. "Sometimes," she said gently, "people think love is something you can earn by giving more gifts or showing off. But real love isn't about proving you're the best. It's about being there no matter what." Lily nodded, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter. "Then I'm sticking with you." Meanwhile, Alexander's quiet investigation was deepening. He had asked his assistant to discreetly gather background information on each of the women, not to embarrass them, but to confirm a gnawing suspicion. What came back was troubling. Whispered scandals, past lawsuits, even quiet settlements that had been buried under legal agreements. Nothing illegal enough to remove them outright, but enough to make him question their sincerity. In contrast, Naomi's background was spotless. The only thing remarkable about her file was how much she had achieved despite the obstacles life had thrown at her. That weekend, Alexander invited the entire household for a picnic on the lower lawn. It was meant to be a gesture of unity, but it became yet another showcase of the women's attempts to outshine Naomi. Victoria brought an elaborate charcuterie board. Priscilla recited a story about winning a high-profile case for a celebrity client. Amanda handed out gift bags with luxury soaps. Christina offered health tips, and Rebecca unveiled a miniature model of a dream playhouse she could design for Lily. Through it all, Naomi simply spread out a blanket, unpacked sandwiches and fruit, and let Lily talk about her week. It wasn't flashy, but it was real, and Alexander couldn't help noticing that Lily's laughter rang louder when she was next to Naomi than at any other moment that day. By the end of week 3, the cracks in the facade were no longer subtle. The women's smiles at Naomi had grown thin and brittle, their patience shorter, their remarks sharper, and though Naomi never retaliated, her quiet resilience only seemed to frustrate them more. They couldn't understand how someone with no wealth, no status, and no official claim to the child could hold a place in her heart that none of them could touch. What they didn't realize was that they weren't just losing a competition, they were revealing themselves piece by piece to the one man whose opinion truly mattered. And Alexander, though he hadn't yet spoken a word of it, was beginning to wonder whether he'd been looking for Lily's new mother in entirely the wrong place. The breaking point. By the fourth week, the mansion no longer felt like a competition. It felt like a battlefield where the weapons were not swords or fists, but whispered conversations, strategic interruptions, and subtle manipulations designed to erode Naomi's place in Lily's heart. The candidates had abandoned any pretense of supporting one another. They operated like a coalition of convenience, united only by their shared belief that Naomi did not belong. Alexander watched all of it with the calm of a man who had built his career on negotiation and patience. But beneath that composure was a growing storm. It began that Monday morning when Lily came down for breakfast looking subdued. Naomi noticed instantly. The sparkle in her eyes was dim, and she moved as though weighed down by something she didn't understand. When Naomi set her plate of waffles in front of her, Lily managed to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "What's wrong, sweet pea?" Naomi asked quietly, crouching beside her chair. Before Lily could answer, Victoria breezed into the room wearing a silk robe and a satisfied expression. "Oh, she's just feeling a bit overwhelmed. We had a little talk this morning, didn't we, Lily? About how people sometimes need to spend time with those who can really give them a better future." Naomi's gaze shifted to Lily, whose cheeks flushed with discomfort. She didn't push for details in front of Victoria, but the moment they were alone later that morning, Lily whispered, "She said you're just here for now, but she'll be here forever. She said if I get too close to you, I'll get hurt when you leave." Naomi's heart sank, not because of what was said, but because she knew exactly what it was meant to do. This wasn't about Naomi's qualifications or status. It was about planting doubt in a child's mind. And in Naomi's world, that was the cruelest kind of sabotage. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. Whenever Naomi and Lily were together, one of the women would appear with an activity or an errand designed to lure the child away. If Naomi helped Lily with homework, Amanda would interrupt with tickets to an ice cream parlor. If they were in the garden, Christina would invite Lily for a health-focused cooking lesson. The interruptions were deliberate, timed to make Naomi feel like an outsider in a relationship she had built with genuine care. What none of them realized was that Alexander had quietly taken the gloves off in his own investigation. The private investigator he had hired, Marcus Thompson, was sending him daily reports now, summaries of lawsuits, staff complaints, and financial scandals the women had worked hard to bury. And the more Alexander read, the more convinced he became that these candidates, despite their polished appearances, were not the role models he wanted for his daughter. He didn't share this with Naomi yet. He wanted to see how events in the house would unfold without his interference. The breaking point came on Thursday afternoon. Naomi had promised Lily they would bake her mother's favorite chocolate cake, a recipe Lily had found in Charlotte's old handwritten cookbook. For Lily, it wasn't just baking, it was a way to feel close to the mother she had lost. They had just begun measuring flour when Priscilla appeared in the kitchen doorway, her smile thin. "Oh, Lily, we can't have you eating cake in the middle of the day. Why don't you come with me instead? I've arranged for you to meet a children's etiquette coach. Very important for young ladies of your future standing." Naomi straightened, her hands still dusted with flour. "We were in the middle of something special," she said evenly. "Perhaps the etiquette lesson can wait until after." Priscilla's eyes narrowed. "I wasn't asking you, Naomi." The words landed like a slap, their dismissal as sharp as their tone. Before Naomi could respond, Alexander's voice cut through the room. "Actually, Priscilla, you are asking me. And my answer is no. If Lily has plans, she keeps them." The room went still. It was the first time Alexander had openly intervened in Naomi's favor. Priscilla's lips tightened, but she forced a smile and retreated. Lily beamed at her father before turning back to the cake, and Naomi, though she didn't show it, felt a quiet surge of gratitude. It was a small moment, but it told her Alexander was beginning to see. That night, as the house settled into silence, Naomi sat in her small room, staring out the window at the shadowed garden. She thought about her mother, about the years she had watched her navigate similar households with quiet dignity, and about the promise she had made to herself, to never let the subtle cruelty of privilege break her spirit. This job had started as a way to pay bills, but now it had become something far more personal. She wasn't just a housekeeper, she was Lily's safe place, her constant in a world of shifting alliances. Alexander in his study reviewed the latest recordings. In one, he saw Naomi and Lily bent over the cake batter, laughing as they tried to keep the flour from spilling. In another, he watched Victoria whispering to Amanda, their eyes fixed on Naomi with expressions that were anything but friendly. And in yet another, he saw Lily, sitting alone in the garden, pulling petals off a daisy as if lost in thought. He shut the laptop and sat back, the decision forming in his mind. The competition wasn't over yet, but Alexander knew now that the real test wasn't about who could win his daughter's affection with grand gestures. It was about who could be trusted with her heart when no one was watching. And in that unguarded space, Naomi was already miles ahead. The setup. The fifth week opened with a tension so thick that even the staff moved more quietly through the mansion. There was no more thinly veiled civility between the candidates and Naomi. Now their disapproval was an open undercurrent in every room. The women had stopped trying to hide their glances or the way their voices dipped when Naomi entered. But what they didn't realize was that they were walking into a trap, not one set by Naomi but by Alexander himself. He had decided that if this competition was to continue, it would end with the truth laid bare for everyone to see. His plan was deceptively simple. On Friday evening, he would host a formal dinner in the Great Hall. All 5 candidates would be present, along with key members of his business network and several of the staff, including Naomi. It was framed as a celebration of the month's family experiment, but in reality, it was a stage. The guests were people who had known Alexander for years and could read him well enough to recognize when something was amiss. More importantly, they were people whose opinions the candidates valued. The dinner would be an opportunity for everyone to act naturally, something Alexander was counting on because naturally had become the women's greatest weakness. Meanwhile, Naomi carried on as if nothing were different. She focused on Lily, as she always did, reading to her in the evenings, helping her finish her school projects, encouraging her to try new recipes in the kitchen. But beneath that calm surface, she had begun to quietly brace herself. She had seen people like the 5 women before, people who believed they could manipulate a narrative simply by speaking with enough confidence, and she suspected that if they felt the competition slipping away, they would grow bolder. Her instincts proved correct. On Wednesday afternoon, as she folded laundry in the staff quarters, she overheard voices in the hallway outside. The tone was sharp, the words clipped. "We need to make sure this dinner seals the deal," Victoria was saying. "He's still watching her far too closely. We can't afford for him to keep her around." Amanda's voice followed, lower but no less pointed. "If we all bring up little concerns at the table, it'll be impossible for him to ignore." Priscilla added, "And it won't just be our word. If we phrase it as concern for Lily's well-being, the others will support us. No one can accuse us of being petty if it's about the child." There was a murmur of agreement before their footsteps retreated down the hall. Naomi stayed still until the sound faded completely. She didn't feel fear. What she felt was a kind of clarity. These women weren't just trying to win a competition. They were trying to rewrite her role in Lily's life into something negative, something disposable. That night she called her older sister Camille, who had a knack for seeing through complicated situations. "They're planning something for the dinner," Naomi explained. "It's going to be public, and they'll make it sound like they're only worried about Lily." Camille didn't hesitate. "Then you let them talk. People reveal more about themselves when they think they're in control. Just make sure the right eyes are on you when it happens." Alexander, for his part, spent Thursday finalizing details for the dinner. The table in the Great Hall would be set with the finest silver, the candles tall and elegant. Each guest would have a seat assigned. Lily between Naomi and himself, the 5 women spread evenly along the table. The seating wasn't just for balance, it was a test. He wanted to see how the women behaved when Naomi was clearly given a place of honor beside his daughter. Friday arrived and the mansion buzzed with activity. Florists delivered arrangements of deep red roses and white lilies. The kitchen staff worked with quiet precision, and the household moved under an unspoken agreement to present perfection. The guests began to arrive as the sun dipped low, casting the front steps in golden light. Alexander greeted each warmly, but his eyes were sharp, scanning for the smallest flicker of reaction when they saw Naomi seated with Lily. The evening began smoothly enough. Glasses clinked, polite conversation floated through the air, and the first course was served without incident. But Alexander could feel it, the tension building, the anticipation of a moment the women had rehearsed among themselves. It came midway through the second course when Victoria leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "Alexander, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but some of us have been a bit concerned." He set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "Concerned?" Victoria glanced at the others, who nodded with practiced solemnity. "It's about Lily," she continued. She's such a bright child, but we've noticed she's forming very exclusive attachments to staff members. It's not that we don't appreciate their care, of course, but it might not be the healthiest dynamic long term." Priscilla chimed in, her tone measured. "Children of her standing benefit from a broader range of influences. Becoming too dependent on someone who may not be part of her future could make transitions harder for her." Christina added, "We only bring it up because we care. We want what's best for her development." The table was silent for a moment, every guest looking to Alexander. He let the quiet stretch just long enough for discomfort to set in before speaking. "That's interesting," he said slowly. "Because what I've noticed is that Lily is happiest when she's with people who make her feel safe. That's not about status or future or the circles we move in. That's about character." His eyes swept the table, lingering on each of the women before settling on Naomi. "And in this house, character matters more than anything else." Lily, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it, reached for Naomi's hand under the table. Naomi squeezed it gently, her expression calm, but her mind acutely aware of what had just happened. Alexander hadn't confronted them outright, but he had drawn a line, and the women knew it. Meanwhile, Naomi spent the day much as she always did. She and Lily worked together in the garden, planting late-blooming flowers in a narrow bed near the east wall. Naomi kept her focus on the child, but her mind replayed fragments from the dinner. Alexander's calm but firm defense, the way the women's expressions had shifted, and the subtle squeeze of Lily's hand under the table. Something had changed, though Naomi didn't allow herself to speculate too much. She had learned long ago not to expect recognition for simply doing what was right. If Alexander saw her worth, it was because he valued the same quiet principles she lived by, and if he didn't, then she would leave knowing she had been true to herself and to Lily. Later in the evening, Lily found her father in his study. She climbed into the chair opposite him, her small legs swinging above the floor. "Daddy," she said, "are you going to choose one of the ladies soon?" Alexander studied her face, the honesty in her gaze. "Do you think I should?" he asked gently. Lily didn't hesitate. "No, I already chose. I want Naomi to be my new mom. She's the one who tucks me in, who listens, who doesn't make me feel like I'm being tested all the time." She paused, frowning slightly. "The other ladies, they don't really see me. They just see you." Her words struck him harder than she could have known. It wasn't just a child's preference. It was an indictment of the very process he had put in place. He reached across the desk, taking her small hand in his. "Then I think it's time we made sure everyone knows what really matters here." The following day, Alexander sent out formal invitations for a Sunday evening closing dinner. The message was brief and neutral, thanking the women for their participation and noting that a final announcement would be made. The guests would once again include members of his business and social circles, as well as key staff. Naomi was invited without explanation, though the placement of her name alongside the formal guest did not go unnoticed by the candidates. The hours leading up to the dinner were thick with speculation. The women dressed carefully, each determined to present herself as the most poised and gracious in the room. Naomi, in contrast, wore a simple navy dress and a silver pendant that had belonged to her mother. She had not been told what Alexander intended, but she could feel that the air in the mansion had shifted, calmer, more decisive. When the guests were seated, Alexander opened the evening with a few words about the purpose of the past month, framing it as a journey to find not just a partner for himself, but the right presence for Lily's life. Then, with deliberate composure, he invited Marcus Thompson into the room. The investigator, dressed in an understated suit, carried a folder under his arm. "I was asked to look into the backgrounds of everyone who has been part of this process," Marcus began, "to ensure that any decision made would be in Lily's best interest." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that prickled at the back of the neck. One by one, Marcus laid out the findings. No embellishments, no theatrics, just the facts as they stood. As each revelation landed, the women's polished smiles faltered. The color drained from their faces. The guests, many of whom had known these women socially, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Naomi sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, not gloating, not even looking directly at the women. When Marcus finished, Alexander spoke again, his voice steady. "Character is not about charm or appearances or the circles we move in. It's about how we treat people when we believe no one important is watching. Over the last month, I've watched all of you, and I've also watched Naomi. Sess. He was never part of this competition. Yet she is the only one who consistently put Lily's needs before her own, without expectation of reward or recognition." The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, but the balance had shifted. Alexander had made it clear that the game was no longer about impressing him. It was about proving they understood the values he held dear. And for the first time, Naomi realized that she wasn't standing alone in this. She had an ally in the one person whose decision would matter most in the end. The unraveling. The Saturday morning after the dinner dawned unusually quiet, as though the mansion itself was holding its breath. The grand hall, now cleared of the fine linens and glittering crystal from the night before, felt larger and colder, echoing faintly when footsteps crossed the marble. The 5 women, still smarting from Alexander's pointed remarks, gathered separately in little clusters, no longer unified in their whispered campaign against Naomi, but equally unsettled by the realization that their control over the narrative was slipping. Each of them understood that the dinner had been a turning point, though they didn't yet know just how much Alexander had seen or heard. In his study, Alexander sat behind his desk, the morning light falling across a series of neatly stacked files. These were Marcus Thompson's completed background reports, the ones Alexander had been waiting for. Weeks of quiet investigation had come to this moment. There was no satisfaction in what he held. If anything, there was disappointment. Disappointment that people who appeared so refined could carry histories so sharp-edged with selfishness, cruelty, and deception. He picked up Victoria's file first, her expulsion from 2 charitable boards due to misappropriation of funds. The legal action settled quietly through her family's influence. Next was Priscilla, with documented harassment claims from former employees, 2 of them involving racially charged remarks that had been resolved with generous severance packages and non-disclosure agreements. Christina's file revealed license suspensions in 2 states, each linked to malpractice settlements buried under confidentiality clauses. Rebecca's financial records showed repeated IRS audits, with fines paid but no explanation given to the public. Amanda's file, perhaps the most troubling, contained affidavits from ex-staff alleging a toxic and racially discriminatory work environment within her hotel chain. Alexander leaned back, exhaling slowly. The irony was bitter. These women had questioned Naomi's suitability for Lily, yet their own pasts were lined with behaviors far more damaging than anything Naomi had ever done. And it wasn't just the reports. Over the last month, Alexander had seen firsthand how Naomi handled conflict, with restraint, with quiet strength, with the kind of maturity that came from experience rather than privilege. She didn't argue or try to prove herself. She simply kept showing up for Lily again and again, with a consistency that none of the others could match. That afternoon, Alexander made his decision. But he also knew that simply telling the women they were no longer part of the process wasn't enough. Their manipulations had been subtle, and unless the truth was exposed, they would walk away believing they had been wronged, perhaps even spinning the story to their advantage. So he began to set the stage for what would be the final and most important gathering, one that would leave no doubt about his reasons. Lily, seated between Naomi and her father, squeezed Naomi's hand again. "That's why I choose her," she said aloud, her voice clear in the quiet room. There was no rebuttal, no clever argument that could undo the truth of that moment. The outcome was sealed not by Alexander's authority, but by the unwavering honesty of a child who knew her own heart. A choice made in the open. The air in the great hall after Lily's words was thick and unmoving, as if even the walls were waiting for someone to breathe again. The 5 women sat frozen in their seats, their perfectly composed faces cracking in places they couldn't control. Some stared down at the table as if hoping the polished wood would swallow them whole. Others shifted their posture, forcing smiles that felt hollow even to themselves. Across from them, the guests exchanged quiet glances, the kind of unspoken communication that said reputations had just shifted in real time. Alexander rested his hand gently on Lily's shoulder, his voice carrying a measured warmth that still held the weight of finality. "I brought 5 extraordinary women into this home, each with accomplishments that most could only dream of. But I forgot something important. Accomplishments don't raise a child. Titles don't tuck her in at night. Wealth doesn't teach her the value of kindness. And over the past month, the person who has done all those things for my daughter isn't someone I found in a social registry or a business gala. It's the woman sitting right here beside her." He turned his gaze to Naomi, not as an employer, but as a man who understood the rare weight of what she had given. "Naomi, you've been here for Lily in ways I didn't even realize she needed. You've done it without expectation, without strategy, without trying to prove anything. You simply cared, and that's something no amount of money or status can buy." The words hung in, the air like a verdict. Naomi, who had spent the entire dinner listening without interruption, finally allowed herself to meet his gaze. "Mr. Bradford," she began, her voice calm and steady, "I didn't come here to compete for anything. I came to work, to keep my promise to a little girl who needed someone to show up for her. That's all I've ever tried to do. If that's worth anything to you, then I'm grateful. But it's always been worth everything to me, no matter the outcome." It was Lily who broke the formal weight of the moment, her small hands still clutching Naomi's. "Daddy, can we just tell them now? I want Naomi to stay forever." There was no tact in her words, no careful phrasing, just the purity of a child's truth. And in that truth, every layer of the last month's tension seemed to peel away. Alexander nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Naomi's. "Then that's the decision. The competition is over. Thank you all for your time, but the person who will be in Lily's life, by her choice and mine, is Naomi." The shift in the room was instant. The women's composure fractured entirely. Victoria's smile faltered into something brittle before she looked away. Amanda's eyes flashed with disbelief. Christina adjusted her napkin as if busying her hands could disguise the blow. Priscilla's lips pressed into a thin line, and Rebecca, the quietest of the group, simply exhaled as though she'd been expecting this all along. The guests, on the other hand, responded with a quiet murmur of approval, several nodding in a way that said they understood and respected the decision. Alexander stood, bringing the dinner to its official close, and the guests began to rise from their seats. As they moved toward the door, a few stopped to speak privately with Naomi, offering polite congratulations not in the language of status, but in the simple acknowledgement of a job well done. The women left in a subdued procession, their heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that felt like retreat. Naomi didn't watch them go. She was focused on Lily, who was chattering about planting new flowers in the garden tomorrow. Later, when the house had quieted, Alexander found Naomi in the kitchen rinsing teacups. She looked up, slightly startled as he stepped in. "You don't have to do that tonight," he said. "The staff can handle it." She smiled faintly. "I'm staff, remember?" He shook his head. "Not anymore. From now on, you're part of this family in a way that no job title could ever cover." Naomi set down the cup she was holding, unsure how to respond. "I don't know what that means exactly," she admitted, "but I do know that Lily's what matters. If she's happy, then I'm where I need to be." Alexander studied her for a moment, seeing not just the woman who had quietly endured weeks of scrutiny, but the one who had never once let her dignity falter. "It means," he said finally, "that you'll never have to question whether you belong here again." In the weeks that followed, the house shifted in ways that had nothing to do with furniture or decor. The air felt lighter, laughter came more easily, and Lily's world became more secure with each passing day. Naomi was still the same. She still baked cookies, still read bedtime stories, still tended the garden. But now she did so without the shadow of someone waiting to replace her. And while Alexander's role in her life was still that of her employer in many respects, there was a growing sense of something else in them, mutual respect, shared purpose, and an unspoken trust that they were building something far more lasting than the outcome of any competition. The 5 women faded from their lives as quickly as they had entered, though their names still carried weight in the circles they moved in. But within the Bradford home, they were little more than a footnote in the story of how a man and his daughter learned that the truest wealth isn't measured in social standing or bank accounts, but in the constancy of someone who shows up when it matters most. One evening, months later, Naomi and Lily stood in the garden, the late spring air carrying the scent of the flowers they had planted together. Lily knelt to inspect a cluster of blossoms, then looked up at Naomi with a grin. "See? They're growing, just like us." Naomi laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "That's how it works, sweet pea. You plant something good, you take care of it, and it grows." From the terrace, Alexander watched them, a rare smile tugging at his mouth. He had set out to find the right woman for his daughter and in the process had been reminded of something his wealth had once made him forget. Love and loyalty don't come with resumes or pedigrees. They're built in the quiet moments, the ones no one else sees, and they're proven over time, not in the glare of a competition. And in that simple truth, the Bradford family, reshaped, redefined, and stronger than before, found its way forward.